A very good morning and welcome. I'm your host, Alicia Jali. You're watching Media Monitor live on SABC News, Africa's news leader, right here on DSTV channel 404. Now, the concept of this program is to monitor and evaluate media coverage of some of the major news stories of the week. We look at the story that did not make headlines and also look at the story behind the story, plus today's newspaper headlines, of course. Now, the aim of the show, once again, is to put the media in the spotlight. In the lineup today, we look at the impact that social media has on journalism, the State of the Nation address from a media's perspective, the DA match, did the media not blow the story out of proportion? We also take a look at the Waterkloof 4 who murdered a man in 2001. Was there sufficient media coverage on the story? And lastly, we delve into the Vavi saga. Has the media not overexplored the story? To give us an analysis on media coverage of the major stories, we welcome Khadija Patel, a Daily Maverick columnist, Christelle du Toit, an SABC digital news production editor, Phenyo Butale, an executive director at the Freedom of Expression Institute. And from our Durban studios, we will be joined by Vera Vencatasamy, a media analyst from Media Link. And lastly, Mr. William Bird, a director at Media Monitoring Africa. Don't forget to continue watching Channel 44 because at 10 until 11 a.m., our SABC contributing editor Vuyo Mvoko will have an exclusive interview with the President Jacob Zuma as he elaborates on the State of the Nation address. Remember, you can be part of our discussion today by calling us on +2711 714 6847, 714 6843, 714 6857. Also share your views and comments on Twitter at SA Media Monitor and like our Facebook page. A very good morning to you. In our top story today, social media has become a very crucial aspect of broadcast and print media. Internet tools like YouTube, Twitter and Facebook are gradually changing the way media operates. Most journalists have Twitter and Facebook accounts where they engage, communicate and break stories to their fans and followers, or even promote themselves and even their shows. Broadcast media and social media have over the years developed a relationship where both are dependent on each other and content and engagement. To discuss the impact of social media on journalism, we're joined by Christelle du Toit, an SABC digital news production editor, and Khadija Patel, a journalist at the Daily Maverick. Ladies, a very good morning to you and thank you for joining us on Media Monitor.
Thanks for having us.
Good morning.
Now, Christelle, social media, do you think that social media has a positive or negative impact on journalism today? And why? Let's start with you, Christelle.
I think social media has to be seen in the context of another tool for a journalist. People often look at social media, at online journalism, at the tools that are there today and think somehow this changes the rules. And it doesn't. One has to look at social media as another source, as another platform for yourself. But your normal journalistic questions of who, what, why, when, where and how do need to apply. You need to verify your sources. You need to have more than one source. But it can be very powerful in that you can reach people that previously didn't even know existed. You can reach people in other parts of the world and you can get extra dimensions to your story.
Absolutely. Now, Khadija, I basically tweeted before I went on air today, which is, that's how powerful it is to send the message across. Has it worked for you as a journalist?
Certainly. I think that, I was able to get my job at the Daily Maverick, for example, because I was using social media prolifically. It has definitely changed the scope of content, for example, that journalists can focus on. And for me, 3 years ago, when the Arab Spring was kicking off between Tunisia and Egypt, it was a story that I realized that the South African media wasn't paying much attention to, but at the same time I could understand that something very significant was happening there, something that I felt that had repercussions as well for our situation in South Africa, considering our similarities in terms of socio-economic context. So I began following what was happening there and also broadcasting what was happening there, curating content for a South African audience. And it is my sustained broadcasting, if we could call it that, of what was happening in Egypt particularly that got me noticed, that enabled me then from that point for whatever I wrote from that point to become widely known. So it definitely has had a personal impact on me, certainly. A positive impact
certainly. For you, Khadija. Now, Christelle, how safe is the content on social media? Can people rely on those facts? Because as you mentioned earlier, journalists still have a certain code of conduct to adhere to.
Absolutely. I think the role of the journalist has changed in the context of social media. Your news is going to be broken on Twitter and on Facebook. You then have a responsibility to still make sure, is that news correct? Have your facts right before you have the facts out there first. And your role as journalist then becomes to add context, to add value to your reporting. Especially with online media, there are very powerful ways to do that. You can visualize things. For example, with the passing of former President Nelson Mandela, you can online place route maps of where people can view the body as it travels through Pretoria. But you still have to make sure your source is credible. Sometimes it's made easier, for example, by Twitter's verified accounts, where you can see, yes, this is the correct account. But then you also have to do your research and make sure that your information is reliable, not just retweet anyone. Keep in mind that, Khadija was saying, you almost become a brand online in itself, and your brand depends on your reliability and the information you put out there. So the responsibility remains with the journalist.
Absolutely. Now, Khadija, is it acceptable for journalists to rely solely on social media for sources, and do media ethics apply in that sense?
Absolutely. As Christelle said, the rules don't change. You still have to do your basic fact-checking, be your sources be on social media.
But what about those stories that break first online and really nobody else knows about it?
But then this is where the role of the journalist comes in, where you have to play the part of a fact-checker to make sure that what we're hearing, what is being broadcasted on social media is accurate, it is true. Because it is very easy for someone to spread false news on social media, and we've seen this happening many times. I mean, we're about to speak about the DA march, for example, this week. A photo circulated of an injured man, bleeding,
with blood, yes.
Wearing a DA T-shirt, and this almost started getting people alarmed about what was happening in the Joburg CBD. Only afterwards did we realize that this was actually an old photograph. This was actually a photograph from the DA's march to Kusatu a few years back. So it's become, I think the role of the journalist here changes, where the place of fact-checking has become much more significant.
Now, Christelle, most journalists have Twitter and Facebook accounts. How imperative are these social tools in journalism?
I think it's become very important, and I think electronic tools in general have become very important. I think we run the risks as journalists to become dinosauric if we don't embrace things like, for example, data journalism, where people will still have this thing where they think it's numbers and, journalists work with words. But as with any other story, you look at the editorial element behind it. You look at what is the information you require, because even data journalism will only tell you what you ask of it. But to a journalism student today, I would say, yes, you still need the on-the-ground experience. Yes, you need the basics of journalism, but you have to educate yourself about online tools.
And finally, is social media a threat on print and broadcast media in terms of breaking stories? I want to start with you, Christelle, and then Khadija.
I think the reality is, yes, it is going to be broken on social media, but that doesn't have to be a threat. You can have your platforms work together very well. There are a number of publications, I think, in South Africa who manage that and manage to break a story on social media, refer back to your website at the SABC as a broadcaster.
Should be a symbiotic relationship.
You have to have a symbiotic relationship where a story gets broken, for example, on Twitter. You can quickly switch on the radio and hear what's happening.
Redirect traffic.
You can watch the TV news to see the pictures of the DA march, for example, and place it in context, because journalists still have to do the legwork. You still have to be at the story. You can't just sit and expect the story to come to you.
Thank you so much. And that's how we ended. Unfortunately, would like to thank Christelle du Toit, who is an SABC editor dealing with social media right here. So when you break out of stories, do check out all our SABC News website. Well, when we return, we'll discuss